Welcome, everyone, to Sports Talk Line, where we talk sports 24/7, 365. And on this week's edition of Battle for the Big East, we got Andrei Greska on, and we're going to talk about the Marquette Golden Eagles. They've been in the news lately, and it hasn't been related to the NCAA tournament. But I think before we get to where we are in the Marquette program, we got to go back to the season. And one of the things I found interesting about Marquette was they lost 6 out of 7. All right, they were down. They were able to get a Big East win, and they had a very impressive win at North Carolina. And then they won 4 out of 5, including that win at North Carolina, which came up within days. You got to give credit to Coach Wojo. But hey, Wojo was a Duke alum. It probably doesn't take him a lot to want to battle North Carolina. And Marquette was the sexy pick going into the Big East tournament. It's like, hey, they get through that first game. They got a weakened Villanova team. They couldn't make a run. Well, a team made a run in that game, but it was Georgetown. But how can you summarize the up and down season for Marquette, especially towards the second half of the season?
Yeah, I mean, last time we talked, I think I described Marquette as consistently inconsistent, and that was just the perfect description for this year, because when they took the floor, you had no idea what kind of team was going to take the floor that day, that game, that half, that TV timeout. It was just a lot of pieces that didn't seem to quite fit into a cohesive whole. And so what you saw is talented players like Dawson Garcia, like Justin Lewis, like DJ Carton, that would have big games, that could have big moments, that had flashy dunks or really impressive plays. But at the end of the day, it didn't really fit into a team. And again, obviously some of that blame would have ended up falling on Coach Wojo because he is no longer the coach of the program. But in terms of the season itself, I think it was a very strange feeling to see Marquette playing well at the end of the regular season, because we've been used to the past couple of years of losing 5 of 6 and just ending the season that way. But I think what you said too is true, that it was a kind of a trendy pick that, hey, Marquette, they're not a great team, but if you're going to go for a 9 or 8 seed perspective, like they beat Georgetown before, they probably have a similar roster, relatively similar efficiency metrics. If they beat them, Villanova was a terrible matchup, but obviously they were underhanded. And then from there, Seton Hall and St. John's, neither of them were playing great. And then, once you get to the final, who knows what happened. So 100% correct. And I think I tweeted that week, like, this is the Charlie Brown football. This is the Lucy holding the ball for Charlie Brown. It's going to happen. They're not going to come through it. And sure enough, I mean, I don't think I even lasted a half. I had a couple of work calls that day, so I was just tracking the scores, and I was like, I don't think I have to watch the rest of it, because it was a shellacking and then some.
Yeah, it's always when you're watching your team lose, I feel like that alleviates a lot of your stress. And
right.
A lot of free. When your team's winning, you get a lot of times I get a little more anxious.
Oh yeah, the tension. Yeah, I mean, once you're down by 15 or 20 and there's no real runs, like, all right, well, I mean, I'll follow the game, but it's not really like you're invested in it, because you've kind of, I 100% agree. And it's just weird, because I think the season had a little bit of that too, where once they hit that rut in late January, early February, like we lost all pretenses that this was a team that was going to compete for an NCAA tournament. So once you get past that point, you're looking for moments. Like, I loved watching DJ Carton dunk. Like, I really liked Justin when he came back from his injury. His rebounding ability is just phenomenal. Jamal Cain, Greg Elliott, they like I said, they have pieces, they have players. You watch some of this stuff, but there was no sense that at any point that this was going to be a team that was going to make any noise for nationally. And that's what made the UNC game so special, I think, because there was zero expectation that they would compete. It was just like, well, hopefully they don't get run off the court. Like, it's nice out of conference game. And then from tip to finish, they controlled the game. They really made UNC look terrible. So, as you were saying, it was surprising to fans more so than national media, because the fans were expecting a loss. The national media just wasn't even expecting anything at all.
Yeah, I think, you kind of did bring up a good point. And, it kind of did catch people by surprise. And another surprise that happened, because the feeling was that next year was going to be Wojo's do or die season. Like, his job was going to be on the hot seat, but he was let go. And I want to ask this question, because there was like some of the Marquette bloggers came together and they wrote basically almost a declaration of independence to break away from Wojciechowski. And then 24 hours later, the move was made to let go of Wojciechowski. Do you really think that letter influenced the Marquette decision makers, or was this something that was just like eerie timing where this move was going to happen, just no one knew about it?
Yeah, I'm not vain enough to think that anything that we did would actually move $1 million decision making like that. Because again, Wojciechowski's probably had a multi-million-dollar buyout. We were thinking around the $6 million, and then obviously bringing in a new coach is going to cost millions of dollars. So you have to have some pretty heavy financial backing, and just because your fans are fed up with the current coach isn't really going to change that decision making. So we went into it. So that was Anonymous Eagle, Crack Sidewalk, and Paint Touches, the three blogs that kind of worked on this over a couple of weeks. And what we wanted is just to lay down a marker that, okay, this is enough. We've seen enough, and this was the case against him, not the case against for his removal, which is the case against him as the future of Marquette's program. And then we were going to follow up the next week with, okay, we know he's not getting fired, like we're not idiots, but here's what he can do. And what ends up being ironic more than anything is some of the recommendations that we had already written, like I said, we already had part 2 almost done, is that we wanted a little bit of shakeup on the coaching staff because we felt it had stagnated. There were some good recruiters on there. Obviously, Killings went to Albany, and Gainey came back from Arizona, and Jake Pursuiti's on there too. But they needed an X and O's kind of an old head on there, because that has been an issue for as long as Coach Wojciechowski was on the bench. That wasn't really a strong point. And they needed a little bit of help with analytics too, because it felt like they weren't optimizing some of the rotations. They weren't really playing to their strengths. And it came out, I don't know how true it is. Obviously, you hear things, some things are true, some things are not. But that was two of the requests that the athletic director, Bill Schull, had made of Wojciechowski when they started meeting earlier that week. Like, hey, you still have your job, but we're going to need you to do X and Y, with X and Y being bring in a coach that is kind of X and O minded, someone that can come and sit on the bench and really have an influence on the game plan sort of thing, as well as kind of step up the analytics game, use them. They're available. We were not really optimizing for them. And according to reports, again, from Jeff Goodman, of all people, Steve Wojciechowski declined. So he would rather have gone down with the ship than to make those changes to his coaching staff. So like I said, I don't think anything that we did had any impact on the big picture. I think it just was timed impeccably because the things that were in motion were already going on in the background.
Yeah, that was an interesting point, and I don't know, it's good timing on part, but you do bring up some good points. And if an athletic director calls you in and you kind of, and Wojciechowski, he hasn't won enough. You can say he underachieved, to say the least. And I think a big warning signal was a few years ago when I think Marcus Howard announced he was coming back. And you're thinking Marquette's going to be a top 25 team. And then the Hauser brothers transfer out. I think that was the first thing, like, okay, you were going to win. You're going to get, something was wrong there. I did like the players Wojciechowski brought in. I like Justin Lewis. Dawson Garcia, I think, was a pretty legit player. They finally had that toughness. They still have Theo John. I know Bill Self signed a lifetime contract at Kansas. We'll see if Theo John has the same lifetime contract at Marquette. But, it was done in secret, the Wojo sign. But you know what? Don't keep it a secret. For those of you at home, hit that like and subscribe button and follow Sports Talk Line on YouTube. But something else that was also done in secret, because you didn't really hear about it until it was finally announced, was Shaka Smart was leaving Texas to go to Marquette. And when you look at Shaka Smart, there were some rumblings. The Longhorns weren't happy, even though Texas is a football school first. They weren't happy with Shaka Smart. They kind of were some rumblings. Smart might be pushed out the door, but it looks like Shaka Smart, he left to go to Texas. That opened up a door for Chris Beard going to Texas to leave Texas Tech. That's a different podcast. But how did this whole Shaka Smart to Marquette thing happen? And does Shaka Smart have a previous relationship with Marquette? I think.
I think we got to start there. So back in 2014, when Buzz Williams left for Virginia Tech, there was a strong rumor that Shaka Smart had accepted the job to become Marquette's next head coach. And a couple of local and some national media member had called it a done deal. So if you're around Twitter, if you're around the Marquette faithful or MUBB Twitter, you'll see done deal referenced a lot. And that's kind of taking jabs at what happened in 2014 because the national media as a whole, in terms of Gary Parrish and the Goodmans of the world, are saying, no, he's not going to Marquette, while some of the local media were saying he's done. It's a done deal. He's coming in. So you had that as a backdrop in 2014. Obviously, he doesn't end up taking the job. That he ends up waiting a year and then going to Texas. But in terms of how it relates to now, I do think it played a little bit of a role in terms of the decision making, because you have someone that spurned you before. Like, there was an outrage. It's not like not anyone denies that Marquette was trying to get Shaka Smart at the time. He just declined. So now his star has faded a little bit. He has kind of shown that he didn't have the results in March that are kind of necessary to keep that kind of salary. I think he was making $3.6 million at Texas. He made 3 tournaments, all first round exits, all pretty painful, close losses. But really the only thing he had to show for it was this year, the Big East tournament title, the Big 12 tournament title. So again, not nothing. 5 out of 6 classes were top 20. Really, really good recruiter. 3 first round picks, probably another one or two this year. So he has the goods. It's just he was not able to put them together when it mattered. So now, when it comes to Marquette, I think I was very surprised because I didn't think Shaka was going to be available, number one. I thought, like Wojo, he would be going as kind of a dead man walking into this year, where he had to put up or shut up, give us a result in March, or we'll show you the door. But it seems like it worked out in the best interest for everyone. So, one, Shaka gets a new life. He gets to go to a school that wants him, that's going to pay him well, that has great resources, and a little bit of a more bearable conference. So if he can recruit at a similar level to Texas, like now he's not talking about battling for 3rd or 4th every year. Now he's battling for 2nd or 3rd, trying to peck at Villanova's king of the Big East kind of status. Okay, so it works for him. Marquette, like I said, there was a previous relationship, so this closes some of that circle of, okay, he didn't want us back then, now he wants us now. We've upgraded. This is a coach this is the most experienced coach Marquette has ever hired in its history, with 12 years of coaching experience. So that's exactly what they wanted. They didn't want to gamble on an assistant like the past 3 times. Okay, check that box. Now Texas, what do they win? One, they don't have to pay his buyout, because if they wanted him gone, they would have to pay him, I think it was $6 to $10 million. So that's money they saved. Plus, now they get what they believe to be an upgrade in beer, like we said, from Texas Tech, and kind of stick it to a rival Texas school that had achieved much higher success in the recent past from a basketball perspective. So it's the really rare instance where I think every single person involved, other than some of the Texas Tech fans, are like ridiculously happy. Like Marquette fans are happy, Marquette administration is happy, Shaka's happy, Texas is happy, Texas fans are happy. So it's a win-win-win-win-win as far as I can see it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting too, because since we talk about, it's tough not to talk about the Texas situation, because they're in the same conference. Right. Very rarely do you see a coach jump ship, not being fired, but just being like, yeah, you know what, I'm going to leave. I'm going to go here, which Coach Beard did. It's also too, a lot of the Texas Tech players have put themselves in the transfer portal. Yeah. And I'm not sure how the Big 12 is, if they allow those guys to transfer into the same interconference. But it'll definitely be an interesting Texas game coming up, to say the least. But since we did mention the transfers, how do you look at Marquette right now? Because to my knowledge, Dawson Garcia, I think he's number one. He's the first guy you want to make sure is coming back. We haven't heard anything about him. He hasn't declared for the draft. David Duke has, James Bouknight has from the Big East, but nothing from Dawson Garcia. But how has the transfers, there have been some defections. Yeah. But how do you see the transfers coming in with those both leaving Marquette and those that can potentially come into Marquette?
It's tough because it's been a week and there seems to be a lot of up in the air too. Like you said, so there's the big 3, DJ Carton, Justin Lewis, and Dawson Garcia. Those are the ones that are really the core of the foundation of the team. Obviously, there's other players that are important that will feature, that we will hear from. But in terms of what really makes up the nucleus of the existing roster, those 3 are it. And it seems like DJ Carton's on board. He hasn't made any official statements, but he's tweeted a couple times like, let's go. He's trying to recruit Rocket Watts from Michigan State over. So from a vantage point where we don't know exactly what's going on in the background, he's been the most vocal about Shaka, about the program, and about kind of the transfer market. So I think it's assumed that he is in. Obviously, he already transferred once too, so he wouldn't be eligible for a transfer waiver since that only occurs for the first transfer. So that kind of might affect his thinking. Okay, so now you're left with Justin and Dawson, and I don't know. I don't know. Like, I know Shaka was visiting both of them this week. They were on spring break, so Dawson was in Minnesota, Justin was in Baltimore, and we don't really know. And until we know what's going to happen with them, it's very difficult to kind of make up the rest of the roster because, like you said, the transfer market is going wild right now. There's plenty of options. There's the really talented players left and right, but it doesn't mean to say that you're going to recruit over the people here, but you got to know who's here first. So from the ones that were here last year, Symir Torrance transferred to Syracuse. He was a point guard, probably about 28% of minutes. Didn't have a lot of featured roles. He had a real struggle shooting this year. Couldn't play defense last year. Just it was not a good fit for Wojciechowski's offense. And he's from Syracuse, so it fits well for him there. Then you have Jamal Kane, who was a senior this year, who entered his name into the portal, and he's been contacted by Oakland and Iowa State. So it does seem like he will transfer. Probably won't stay, but again, we don't know yet. And then Kobe McEwen, also he was a fifth-year senior after having transferred from Utah State, so he'd be a grad transfer, entered the portal. So it looks like he will not be coming back. But other than that, like, there's just a whole bunch of question marks, and we don't even know the coaching staff for Shaka yet. So there's a lot of moving pieces. I'm sure there's a lot of recruiting being done in the background, but until we know like what's staying, it'll be difficult to kind of see, okay, what is needed, who's going to be reached out to at this point.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting. To say the least, and players are putting their names in. Some players are definitely leaving, some players are definitely staying. But Andrei, before we leave, can you tell us where we can find you on social media?
Yeah, you can look for us at Paint Touches and find us on the web, painttouches.com as well.
All right, thanks for coming on, Andrei. And remember, everyone, listen like you play with intensity.